Okay, let's talk about the potential of the NFL expanding into Europe into the future, and we're not talking about the international series of games. We're talking about potential expansion teams in Europe. Yes, this is an idea that is not new, and is gaining momentum now. Currently, we have games in the UK, Germany, Spain, and from next year, Ireland. Of course, Australia will be getting games as well from next year. Now, the NFLPA believes that the NFL wants a four-team European division at some point. They want to have a four-team division based in Europe. Now, in order for any expansion or relocation to take place, three-quarters, that's 24 team owners out of the 32, would have to vote in favour of expansion and relocation. Now, we could discuss any nation in Europe, like Ireland, France, Spain, Germany, Italy, somewhere in Scandinavia, Switzerland, whatever it may be. These are all countries which do have US expat populations, and a lot of US tourists go there, and a lot of NFL fans live in Europe. We know this. But we're going to focus on UK as potentially the example we're going to use here. I've done videos on the potential of London having an NFL team in the future and potentially hosting the Super Bowl. Now, London is actually the most likely location of the first European expansion team. Should this happen, expansion is preferred over relocation. There's been the rumour that the Jacksonville Jaguars might become the first London-based team via relocation. But the NFL, if they are to go to Europe, they want expansion. There's also the potential that Roger Goodell thinks that the potential with the size of the urban metro population of London and the southeast being 1/4 of all of the UK's population, but London itself, just London on its own, having a population of I think 8-9 million people, and then you talk about the wider southeast of England going way up to the Midlands. I mean, it's like 24-25 million people live within 3 hours of London or something ridiculous. It's something like that. There's the potential for two teams in London or two teams in the UK. Now, the Jacksonville Jaguars, now this is interesting, and this could pave the way for potential European expansion starting in London. The Jacksonville Jaguars have plans to redevelop their stadium following this season, which will run until 2028. They also plan to play every home game actually away from home in the 2027 season. So there's the potential for the Jaguars to play all their home games in London, for example, as a test bed in 2027 to test the viability of a future expansion team. Because we now know that they're planning this massive, multi-billion redevelopment of their stadium and the surrounding area. They've got no plans to move from Jacksonville. The Jags got no plans to move, even though their owner, Sahid Khan, attempted to buy Wembley in 2018. And I've covered that in videos on the channel. It met with a lot of resistance here in the UK because of the taxpayer-funded nature of the stadium, in part, and the valuation of the stadium as well, which many people correctly said was massively undervalued, and the FA were trying to flog it on the cheap, considering how much it cost to build, and then you add on property value inflation on top of that, the inflation of property prices. It was chronically undervalued, and very, very quickly, the Khan family, who also own Fulham Football Club, A, there would have been a conflict of interest for one, and B, very quickly went, this is not going to go well for us. We could meet resistance as owners of this building. And so that was as close as we got since 2007 to having a London franchise. It met with resistance pre-COVID. Now, the issues. We know Wembley, Twickenham and Tottenham Hotspur have all hosted, the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium have all hosted NFL games since 2007. Wembley, you can't actually sell out at capacity. You lose 5,000 seat because of sight lines, and that's to do with all the NFL paraphernalia on the touchline. They just tape off those seats, cover them up, and you can't use them. So they actually lose capacity, even though the FA makes between £500,000 and £1 million per NFL a game hosted at Wembley, depending on costs and ticket sales. They make anywhere between £500,000 and £1 million. So around, I don't know how much that would be, like $1.2, $1.3 million max end they make. It's not bad. Twickenham, they have had an agreement in the past to have 3 games over 3 years. They also acted as a stand-in when Wembley was not available with the White Hart Lane redevelopment, which is now the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. And of course, Tottenham Hotspur, smaller capacity than Wembley, even with Wembley's reduced seating because of all the technical stuff around the sideline. They do have a 10-year deal to host games between 2019 and 2029. And that 2029 date is crucial because the CBA, which we've mentioned, the NFLPA, believing a 4-team division is very likely, runs until 2030. So that 10-year deal with the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium is potentially crucial. So there's the stadium. You could also use the former Olympic Stadium where West Ham play, although that is significantly smaller than these other 3 stadiums. You could also potentially use the Emirates, just down the road from the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in North London, Arsenal's home ground. There are stadiums in London that could be that home venue for an NFL team, but it's then a stadium availability. And we've seen when Wembley wasn't available and White Hart Lane was being rebuilt, they decided to go with Twickenham. Again, that stadium availability. And that was also working with the RFUs, so that when England were playing test matches, that they could work around and see how the playing surface would hold up. And that is also going to be crucial. The Tottenham Hotspur Stadium has that advantage where it has the retractable NFL pitch and the retractable association football pitch. So that's where I think a home stadium most likely will be that Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. It is specifically designed to host association football, soccer to North Americans, and NFL. It's got that design where the others don't have that standard design. Wembley is more association football / rugby league, and Twickenham is rugby union. So they are stadium specific to their sport, but you can use them because the dimensions work. The logistics are going to be another issue that needs to be resolved. The cost of not only the team hosting the away team, but also travelling to away games back in the US. So those costs of transporting all the backup staff, the players, the equipment, the TV companies, all those logistics, they've been discussed before. That is a massive impediment and a massive cost, not only for whatever franchise or franchises are based in Europe. We're going with London as the example here, but same in Germany, France, Italy, Spain, wherever you want to place a team in Europe, those logistics. And in some countries, the costs of transportation are higher than others. It is true. The cost of living varies as well, so they've got those logistics and those costs. Also, where the off-season training camp is going to be, and where the players will be based on a full-time basis, because that's also going to feed into the tax system and attracting players to play. Salaries as well, another logistical nightmare, because salaries are paid in dollars, then you've got exchange rates and tax systems, and that is all... They might seem very minor things, but actually they do add up. So where would that off-season training camp be based? That is an interesting one, where that would be based. Again, the Jaguars were planning a potential training camp, kind of off-season training camp here in the UK as part of growing the NFL in Europe. So we'll see how that would work. Would they be based in the US in the off-season, or would they be based over here? That'll be interesting. The fan base side of things. Currently, if you look at the UK and we look at Europe as a whole, all 32 teams are represented with fans. So you're going to have to try and convert existing fans. So I'm wearing my 49ers jersey today. I could have worn my Seahawks, my Dolphins, any of my NFL gear. That is a problem. Now, I am a Green Bay Packers fan when it comes to the NFL. I like to see them do quite well. You've got to try and convert those existing fans of existing franchises to support the new team or teams. And then the NFL will say, well, look at the Carolina Panthers when they were granted an expansion in the mid-90s, and the sudden surge of younger fans, especially, kids especially, who bought into the Panthers, not only across the US, but also across the world when it came to their global reach back in the 90s. They say it can be done if marketed right. But that was 30 years ago, and a lot of those kids have grown up, and anyone who was interested in the NFL in the 80s and 90s has grown up. They're in their 30s or in their 40s, and they've established, I'm a fan of insert team here. Also, who would the potential owners be of any franchise? Because there's a couple of association football club owners who also own NFL teams. So you've got the Glazer family and the Khan family, for example, with the Buccaneers and the Jags. Who would be the owners? Would the NFL want to go with US-based ownership groups or local-based ownership groups? And then you've got to look at expansion fees and how much it's going to cost to spend to get into the NFL. The NFL likes expansion fees. All major leagues like expansion fees, which is why they're ridiculously high these days. Who would the ownership groups be? Would they seek US ownership, or would they seek local ownership, or a mix? That would be interesting as well. That hasn't, no one in the UK, for example, has raised their hands saying, I'm happy to be an NFL owner, because it costs a lot of money to pay that expansion fee. Scheduling is going to be a nightmare. Again, with the away teams coming in and also going back to the US to play games. Some have mentioned that if a European team or a London team or a European division would work, they would treat it the same as the University of Hawaii, because they're so far away from the US mainland and how their scheduling works. And I can happily look into that. Now we get to the tax system and salaries and money. Oh, this gets complicated. So, the example I'm going to use when it comes to tax is when my mum used to go over to the US for work, she only got taxed back here by the British government. She didn't get taxed by the US government working over there because she was only going over for short spells and not claiming residency. Now, generally speaking, when you move overseas, you stop paying tax in your home country and you start paying tax in the country you're living in, which is where the tax situation gets interesting. You see, if you are a US citizen, and not all NFL players are US citizens, some are actually from other countries, but if you're a US citizen, when you're working overseas and living overseas because of work, for any length of time, not only do you have to pay tax in the jurisdiction you're in, you also have to pay your income tax to the IRS. So you get taxed on your income twice. Now, each country has different tax bands for higher earners than others, but you're basically being taxed on your salary twice. On top of that, and this is another crucial thing, the salaries will be paid in US dollars. We've seen this in the other major leagues where they've got Canadian teams and the running costs are all done in US dollars, even though teams are based in Canada, which is why it's more expensive for a team to be based in Canada in a major league. Look at the NHL as the example we'll go with. They've got 7 teams based in Canada. It costs more to run them than the US equivalent because of the US Canadian dollar exchange rate. Not only with tax, but also salaries being paid in dollars. And then when you're over, let's say in the UK or in Europe, depending on where you are, you then have to convert your US dollars to pounds, euros, or any other European currency, depending on where you decide to live. Now, if you were living in Switzerland, or if they based a team in Switzerland, that would be Swiss francs. If it's Denmark or Sweden, that would be krona, and different types of krona, because you've got the Danish krona and the Swedish krona, which are different. If they were to place a team in Eastern Europe, for example, there are many different currencies and countries in Eastern Europe which don't have the euro. So you've got exchange rates, and cost of living in each country is different as well. London as a city is exceptionally expensive to live and work in, and I live outside of London, but it's quite expensive where I live, and ironically it's a lot cheaper than London. So you've got, not only have you got taxes and property taxes, so if you're renting a place you still have to pay your property taxes. It's called council tax here. I don't know what it is on the mainland continent of Europe, depending on what country and what jurisdiction, but you've got to pay your taxes. So if you're renting a place as a NFL player, you have to pay, not the landlord, you have to pay council tax. So tax and the various exchange rates, that becomes a bit of a headache. And that's before we get to UK and or EU and or any other European employment law, especially when it comes to the draft and the age restrictions on entering the NFL as a player. Because under EU and UK and other European countries that don't have EU law but have similar laws related to the EU employment law, when you are 16, you can, in most cases, enter the adult workplace. That also includes in professional sports. And I'll use Wayne Rooney and James Milner in European Association football. Everton and Man United with Wayne Rooney, and James Milner started his career at Leeds, currently playing at Brighton via a multitude of clubs. They both debuted at the age of 16 in the Premier League. You cannot do that in the NFL because you have to go through the collegiate draft system, which means you are getting drafted at anywhere between the ages of 18 and 21, 22 into the NFL. You cannot play in the NFL below the age of 18. There's an age restriction. It could be below the age of 21. I don't know how the full draft rules work in the NFL, but that would technically be in breach of employment law. So that is an interesting one. That how would that impact the draft of any European-based team? Would there be special legal exemptions brought in for a NFL or any of the NFL franchises that could be potentially placed in Europe? Again, we'll use London as an example. UK employment law in a lot of industries, not all, a 16-year-old can enter the adult workplace. Now, the industry I work in, you've got to be 18. But in other industries, including sport, which is classed as sports and entertainment, and hospitality, and a lot of them, you can actually work at the age of 16. So that is very, very interesting when it comes to the draft and draft eligibility and contracts and playing. So basically, you could still be at school and playing professional sport here in the UK. It's been done. I believe recently there was a Super League player who was like 17 who debuted, not even 18, rugby league, playing against men. I know several rugby league players debuted when they were 17 in the NRL and in the Super League. They had to get special dispensation, but they were allowed to debut below the age of 18. So that's something that could be a problem. And then you've got visas. The visa issue, oh God, that could be a bit of a headache for some NFL players who've got criminal convictions, because some countries will not allow entry if you have criminal convictions on your record. Or it could prove very difficult to get a visa. That could be a massive, massive difficulty. There could be visa issues for some players. And then we've got to talk about the CBA. Now, none of this expansion into Europe will happen before 2030. The deal that Tottenham Hotspur have with the NFL runs until 2029 for use of their stadium. So that could also be an interesting date. The CBA runs out in 2030. The deal for the NFL to host regular season games at Tottenham runs out in 2029, that they've signed contractually. Could be quite interesting. So I do think this happens. The NFLPA seem very certain it's going to happen. Now, they're not against expansion into Europe, the NFLPA, but they have some concerns. And we go back to the draft and employment law and employment health and safety. It's different in Europe over the US. There's massive differences. Minimum wage is different. Working hours different. What is classed as working and what's classed as non-work. And sports law is different. We have the Bosman ruling. They don't have the Bosman rule in the US. We do over here. And that's, again, if a player's not happy with a contract or wants to have a move from one team to another, he can invoke the Bosman rule over here. Whereas you can't do that in the US. So there's differences in employment law, employment health and safety. The tax system, these players will be getting taxed twice on their income rather than just the once. And that can also, prove a bit of a headache for a potential, if you want to sign a free agent, for example, or sign a player. Do they live over here the entire time? Do they not because of the tax situation? Will they have to relocate their family, or will, all these issues? It's not just sign a player, he's going to play 8 home games, be with the team for that season, off season he's back at home. A lot of times when players move teams, they will move their entire family with them. That means finding schools for the kids. That could mean their partner or wife, potentially having to change jobs as well if they do have employment, because even though some of the NFL players get paid mega money, their wives still and girlfriends still work. So there's that potential of upheaval of the family unit. There's a lot in here that needs to be ironed out. Will they be given salary cap exemption to begin with? Will they be given a boost in the draft to begin with to give them a better opportunity? Expansion draft. How will that all work? But at the moment, the CBA runs until 2030. The NFLPA believes it's going to happen. Roger Goodell is really hinting that this is going to be a future avenue for growth for the NFL. Could we see the NFL at 36 teams? And could the next 4 teams all be placed in Europe? Could we see it at 40 teams, for example? But a major league looking at Europe for an expansion division or expansion teams is not new. The NHL also had similar plans to have a 10-team European division at one point, and have the team up and have the league up to 40 teams. So this is not a new idea, but it's interesting. So place your thoughts in the comments section below. I actually believe it does happen. It's a question of, will the NFLPA be in favour? Will that cause issues with the new CBA? Will enough team owners be in favour of expanding? And what happens if Roger Goodell ends up being replaced as commissioner? What would the next commissioner want? Would he just want to have the international series of games, or follow this also plan or potential plan of future expansion in Europe? But there we go. Place your thoughts in the comments section below, and I'll have some more content for you all very, very soon.